All right. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We'll get started where everyone else does. As far as earliest childhood memories, what are we getting into?
Oh, earliest childhood memory I have is probably it was one of my birthdays. I didn't come from a very wealthy family. So my parents were 18 and 19. They were just kids when they had me.
Okay.
And so they lived in, I think we had upgraded because Hurricane Hugo took out their first home. So I'm in South Carolina. Yeah. So they had a single wide trailer, and then the insurance allowed them to have double wide trailer.
Let's go.
Yeah. So quite the upgrade. But we rode a four-wheeler around. I grew up very rural.
Mm-hmm.
And we had this I think it was a pre-owned trampoline that I have no idea where it came from, but it was in our backyard.
Yep.
And that was probably my earliest memory, and like a swing set.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just all of our friends from like the community that we grew up in, and which was like a total of 5 of them. Yeah. And so that was probably my earliest memory, was just like riding a four-wheeler around with a bunch of my friends.
That sounds fantastic. I ran into a buddy of mine the other day, and he did motocross. And one time he's like, "Hey, you want to ride with me?" And I was very much not into taking risks, but nowadays I'm like, oh, I can do these things. It will be okay. But riding a four-wheeler at such a young age, that seems pretty fun.
Yes, it was. We, being rural, there were a lot of open areas that I'm sure somebody else owned the land, but they clearly could care less, but It was different time. But we had this almost like a dirt track all through these hills that we had sinkholes all around.
That's awesome.
It's near the swamp. And so we would ride through there like that dirt track. I mean, there were a lot of times, so now looking back, most questionable. Probably shouldn't have done some of those things and flipped the four-wheeler over quite as often, but somehow we survived.
Absolutely. So not knowing that your parents didn't have a lot of money, but you kind of saw it in some ways.
Yes. So I never really felt that I didn't have enough, or we never did without. So my parents did a very good job of shielding me from that. Or at least shielding the kids from that. So me and my little brother, I have a little brother who's 4 years younger than me.
Okay.
And so he's not so little anymore, but they worked really hard. And my mom went back she actually didn't have a master's degree or a bachelor's degree whenever she had my brother.
Okay.
And so she went back, I want to say he was 3, maybe 4. So I got to attend college courses. So she went back for a bachelor's, and she would clean houses too, actually, for some of the local people to make money while she was going back to school for a bachelor's degree. And now she has 2 masters, and she's an interventionist. So she helps kids who are struggling with reading and sometimes writing too. She's really good with reading though. But my dad's a full-time steel worker and a part-time farmer. That's what he calls it. It typically becomes more of a full-time of both. But he has worked his way up in a company. It's one of the largest steel companies actually in the U.S. And he's a supervisor there. He's done very well for himself.
Nice.
But they did not come from much. They were they were what you call dirt floor poor, but it was more of the vehicles, not so much the houses. But you could see the pavement. My dad would tell me you could see the pavement through the car floor whenever you were driving, type of thing. But yeah, they worked really hard, and we never, of course I saw it sometimes, they would have arguments or just normal things that you would see in a marriage where they would have arguments about finances and things like that. But outside of that, I never felt like I didn't have enough, or that, other people had more than I did necessarily. I knew it at a little bit older. But outside of that, I just didn't see it, didn't feel it.
Did you play sports after school? Were you focused on your schooling, or what was going on around that?
So I did play sports.
Okay.
I played softball, volleyball, and then in between, later on in my high school career, I also just kind of hung out and ran cross country too, just in between those sports to
Okay.
stay in shape. But I took like every PE course available. I really enjoyed sports a lot. And that was where I met my husband, actually, was in
Okay.
preschool.
Nice. So we'll go middle school, high school. Do we enjoy school at all? Is it more of a hangout? What was that like?
It was okay. I come middle school. Actually, it started earlier than that. I had childhood epilepsy,
Okay.
and I had my first really bad seizure when I was in fourth grade, I believe.
Okay.
So it was the summer and before fourth grade. So I got put on a seizure medication, and put on like 30 pounds over a single summer.
Oh,
And yeah, not great. And
yeah.
kids are not kind when it
No,
comes
no,
to
not at
drastic
all.
change like that. Yes, if you have little kids, they will they will run up and poke you in the stomach and ask,
Yeah,
well,
oh,
why it's
yeah.
so soft? Why is that big? Are you pregnant? I've had all my kids do all of that.
Yeah.
But that was kind of rough,
So,
until middle school.
so when you were given that diagnosis, like, well, what does that look for a child? Is that due to any environmental factors? Is it just the roll of dice or the genes? How does that work? Like, how is it described to you?
They really never did find a cause.
Thanks.
So I know. Go figure. The worst part, I think, as a kid, like the worst experience is going to bed and you have to think about what pajamas you're in, because I've already been embarrassed. I had been embarrassed once before where I wore this like super cute like floral thing, and my mom just let me wear it to bed. I don't even know where it came from,
Yeah.
but it was super embarrassing to wake up in an ambulance with everybody over you after that,
Oh,
and then waking up 2 days later and just so sick. You're so sick whenever you have one of those really big ones. But I actually got, the local hospital accidentally OD'd me on Ativan. They gave me too much for my weight. So they had to medevac me to MUSC here in South Carolina and put me on life support. And so, yeah, I woke up 2 days later with some loose teeth too, because they had to intubate.
so how does that work as far as, do they just like put a hand up and say my bad, or like what's the legal ramifications, or like how is there anything that you get out of that?
Not, not that I'm aware of. Actually, I never even asked my parents about any bills or anything like that, because they never talked about it. Obviously, as an adult,
Yeah.
I know they existed, but I really, nothing happened to my knowledge. Now there was
Why?
yes, it is. They just accidentally just gave me the wrong dosage, and so I was no longer able to breathe for myself. If you OD
Yeah.
on Ativan, you have too much of it. You can't breathe on your own. But I mean, I was still seizing for like, I want to say it was like a 24-hour period where I was seizing. It was a what they call a grand mal seizure, um, and so that was scary. And I woke up super sick. That was the worst one.
So when this is happening to you, do you have someone that you can talk to about this, or what's the mental conversation looking like, or the outward conversation looking like?
I didn't really fully understand what was going on. I mean, my parents explained it to me,
Right.
and as best they could, because I'm sure they were in shock too.
Yeah.
It's terrifying, for a parent to see their child go through that in full clonic seizure. But we had my cousin, so my dad's brother's child. He or she had epilepsy, but she had cerebral palsy. She had a twin in the womb who passed.
Okay.
And so it impacted her in the womb. And so my parents had seen her have seizures before. And so that's the only way they knew what was going on.
Gotcha.
But I'm sure my mom didn't sleep very well
Yeah.
throughout most of my childhood. And
Oh,
she would find me places like seizing. And sometimes
yeah.
it was a very light one where I just wasn't all the way conscious. Like I just wasn't
Mhm.
all the way there, but she would just find me random places in the house.
Yeah. Did you from the overdose on the, what you said, it was Ativan. Is that how you say
Out
it?
of van, yeah.
Ativan. Is that where the start of the mistrust of professionals would have happened? That
Surprisingly not. I didn't fully understand what had happened, and they didn't tell me until much later on. I was like, that's what I was motivated. I thought I was just having a really bad seizure. I didn't know. So I could only imagine as a parent now how they handled that. But they were so focused on me that they probably didn't have time to get angry.
Yeah, I'm always interested why people have certain opinions, and like for me, I have a mistrust of just professionals of any area, because like I've met a lot of professionals. I'm like, oh, you're wrong, or made these drastic mistakes. And I'm like, okay, we're questioning everything. So I'm always wondering when that happens for people.
No, that came much later in life,
Okay,
actually.
we'll get there for sure. So you put on 30 pounds. Is that due to the medication just slowing down your metabolism, and then you just stop doing anything? Like, what did that look like?
It does make you very tired,
Okay.
so that contributes to it, but it also increases your appetite quite drastically.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, I was like an empty pit. I don't know
Yeah.
how I could eat for days, and I was hungry all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, kids weren't very kind.
No. I can't imagine. So what was the first introduction to kids not being kind?
Mm. So whenever I went back to school after that summer, it was the nickname Weight Watchers Queen, and it's during the time the Weight Watchers was just coming out, and so yeah, it was rough. And then I had to get glasses, and that made it so much worse. Oh my God, just adding insult to injury.
Come on, Lord, I'm already dealing with it right now. Um, Yeah, I think I got called fat once in like fourth grade, and like I held on to that for like an extended period of time. And like I was barely even overweight. That now that I go look back at photos, like it's just, when that was once. So how
Mhm.
did you handle with knowing that, like, hey, this is the medication. It's not like it's just they're just being rude. Like how did that affect you?
Uh, it affected me a good bit. So I would go home and like beg not to go back to school, and I would cry like, the whole way home from school. My parents were always super supportive, so they
Yeah.
tried to help me in any way they knew how. And they would always tell me how beautiful I was and things like that. So I mean, for two teenage parents, like they're pretty awesome. They did a very good job of not screwing me up. It's
Hey,
pretty
that's good.
impressive.
That's important.
Yes.
So how did you get past that phase? Was there anything specifically that you would tell yourself, or is just the support of your family that helped you?
It was a lot of the support of my family, but then also, my parents, they really motivated me to do whatever it was that I was passionate about. And so I started diving in a good bit to nutrition
Okay.
and sports and things like that. So I started playing softball. And it was probably my sixth or seventh grade year. I actually came off of medication right before, I want to say it was like a year before my 15th birthday. So I was able to
Okay.
come off around age 14. And that helped tremendously. So weight started falling off,
Mhm.
and I didn't seize anymore. I had outgrown my, whatever, the childhood epilepsy. It stopped.
What? Did the doctor just say, "Well, good job, everybody"?
That pretty much summed it up. Yeah, it was. We had tried to. I mean, looking back now, I'm like, you couldn't figure out anything. It's just a thing that happens just randomly. Oh, and then all of a sudden it's gone. What kind of sense does that make? But
Great
as a
job, doc.
kid, I know, right? As a kid, you don't get that. They even tried to switch my medication because of the weight gain at one point, and I seized like
Okay.
midway through that transition.
Yeah.
So nothing really helped the weight gain necessarily, but it was a rough few years for sure. And
Uh-huh.
once I came off of it, uh, everything started to shift in the right direction. So I started getting better at sports. Obviously, you can run faster, that helps.
That helps.
But from there, I started developing a lot faster than the rest of the girls around me, things like that. So that brought a whole new challenge when it comes to bullying.
Yeah.
When you get called up to play varsity and the rest of your friends are still playing JV, like it doesn't, it breeds a good amount of resentment. But then you can fast forward to a ninth grade year. I met my husband, who had just moved back because his dad was in the Navy. And so he kind of became like my safe haven. He became my best friend. And it was just I still had those outside forces. It was just mean. Like, that's just a thing. They're mean. And I mean, I wasn't perfect either, but I did not enjoy that experience a ton. So I was ready to get out of that small town and move on to college. And so, yeah.
Well, and that's the largest, it's one of the reasons I'm pushing for homeschool to my wife, because it's really tough for girls, especially. You're growing up around people doing the same exact things as you are, so you don't necessarily have like a role model that might be 6 months older, or it's somebody's sister. Like, it's just, you're spending a huge amount of time with people that are also going through the same thing, so you just see how it goes. And nobody I talk to is just like, oh yeah, like middle school, high school, like everyone was just super nice, healthy mentally. They just said good job, nice outfit. Like, I was surprised that stuff just wasn't going on.
I know. At the same time, and I've become quite the fan of homeschooling too, and I want to shift to that too. But while you're building a company, it's very hard.
Yes.
So it's probably not the right time for me to shift to that, but I foresee it in the future.
Well, and then like depending on the school system, also you can have where it's a group of kids and they all have good families, and then they just like go and hang out. And so our friends, they're out in more of a rural area, and she's like, hey, can I go to summer school? Like, I love hanging out with my friends.
That's awesome.
Like, I've never heard someone wanting to go, but they let her go, and she loves it. So it's a positive experience. I think she's only in like second or third grade, so I don't think they've hit the point where everybody becomes an enemy and competing, but they'll get there.
Yes.
So with your parents and the home life, what did nutrition look like for you? Were they cooking all the meals? Were you cooking the meals? What was going on there in high school?
No, my mom cooked most of the meals. And like, if I wanted something different, I would cook it for myself. But actually I'm going to say it was in 8th grade or 9th grade, my mom, I wanted to try like a diet of some sort to try and help, because I'd started struggling a little bit with my weight. Fast forward, I ended up with a postpartum thyroid condition after the second child. But I'm pretty sure I was borderline for most of my life. Looking back now, I recognize a lot of the symptoms, but it would fluctuate occasionally, and playing sport helped being younger. But it was never easy for me. So I asked her to take me to this place. It was, I think my aunt or a family member was doing this diet, and it wasn't anything like what anyone else was doing. And it ended up being more of a version of like keto carnivore. It was called the Myrtle Beach diet at the time, which was unheard of. Like, just no one did those things. Everyone believed fat was bad at that time. So to eat all meat, mainly meat, and learn low carb at a young age, honestly, I think that was a huge benefit for me. So my mom took me, and they even had like, peptides now, they had like amino acids that you would take. It actually helped me focus. So I'm pretty sure from the seizure medication, it's just such a heavy downer for so many years. So I'm pretty ADD, a little bit, slightly hyperactive, but not as much as most people. But I really struggle with inattention. So I found that it helped me, those amino acids, or whatever they called them at the time. They said it was like a peptide combo, and those little like supplements were phenomenal. I'm pretty sure they're probably more of a controlled substance these days, but whatever it was, they helped me with my schoolwork. And I was like, wow. I was like, okay, this thing works for me. And even without those supplements, it still worked for me. So that was what I'd always done. I would always resort back to that. If I ever started struggling with my weight, I would resort back to low carb. I did it for like six or 7 years from
Yeah.
high school through college, even after I got married.
Yeah, I was not was am allergic to wheat, soy, and corn. So at a young age, I learned how to read ingredient labels and figured out I couldn't eat anything.
Yep.
So my reaction was just like a really runny nose and hives apparently sometimes to like some
Hmm.
bunnies and other things like that. But definitely when I eat cleaner now, like I feel a lot better in my attention, like my ADHD, like I don't take the stuff, the drugs that they gave me because they were pretty heavy. And the doctor that I was seeing said, "Hey, like if you don't see them working like a lot, we've been seeing some like Alzheimer's like correlation type of thing." So
What?
I'm like, "Yeah, no, I don't think that it's that beneficial. I guess I'll just eat clean for the most part, but thank you."
Jeez.
But yeah, I think that the clean eating helps in a plethora of areas. What was your go-to as far as like keto carnivore? Like, would you meal prep or would you just eat like the meat fat part or whatever the meal was?
Yeah, I wouldn't prep. Not, not early on. I wouldn't
Yeah,
prep or anything like that. I would just eat like if I needed to go to McDonald's, I'd take the bun off.
yeah,
So it wasn't like crazy healthy, but back then the quality was a lot different than it is today
just a little
too,
bit, just a little bit.
slightly.
So when you went to go see those medical professionals, what was the conversation like? Because I would feel like going to see a doctor now, they do some tests and then they look at their chart to tell you what the test says, and then they just talk off of that. Like, what was your experience with when we saw these people?
So they weighed me whenever I came in initially, and it was very positive for like to be a doctor that helps with weight and nutrition.
Yeah,
It was very positive. I don't even know where these people are anymore. It was like Dr. Norman, I think, is the one who started it, and he was
yeah,
there at the beach, so in South Carolina. But it was very much an education about nutrition. What are carbs? Like, how much should you have based off of your age, your weight, your body type? And that education is just something that now thinking back, like, why why is this not taught in schools? Why does everyone not get this? And I mean, I guess I'm grateful that they kind of didn't, because the entire idea behind nutrition now we're finding out was pretty far off base.
yeah. Well, I feel like the food pyramid was perfect for the time World War II when people were the Americans were starving because they couldn't find enough calories. We
Yes.
fix those problems of starving, but it takes the government a little longer to fix the the food suggestions. Like when the My Plate and then the stuff after that, like it was getting better, but by the time it got into the education system and then went through Kellogg's or whoever was lobbying, whatever it is, it took a little bit too long. But the thing that surprised me the most is the educators that don't have an education in elementary through high school, and like they're not looking it up, or they get pushed back from the school because like I know a lot of teachers are like, hey, the school wants to give the kids this and this, and they're like, what are we doing? Like this is not going to help them focus. Like we're giving them Rice Krispies for breakfast. Come on, what are we doing?
Yes. Yes. I wrote a paper. I did a comparison of all of the different diets and looked at long-term stability, effectiveness, all of that in college. Because I had been doing low carb for so long. So I was like, let's just see, like, I want to see the health outcomes
Mhm.
long term. And surprisingly enough, after pulling all of those, it ended up being low carb and
Mhm.
high fat, high protein. That was what had the best results if you could shift it into a lifestyle versus just a short-term gain.
Mhm.
um, Across the board, they had better outcomes, less cancer, less heart disease, which
Yeah.
I was like, wait, what?
All right, who was funding your paper? Was it Big Red Meat or Big Cow? They were giving you the funding.
I know, right? No, surprisingly not. I had no sponsors as a sophomore in college.
So how did you pick where you were going to college at the end of either junior year or high school?
So I went to several colleges, but I started off at Francis Marion is actually where my mom went to school.
Okay.
Went back for a bachelor's. I spent 1 year there. And then my boyfriend at the time, who would become my husband, he played baseball he was a year ahead of me.
Okay.
So he played baseball for a junior college in Sumter, South Carolina for 2 years. His second year being my first year of college. He got recruited for College of Charleston. So I know, it was really awesome. So we spent that year together at College of Charleston. He got redshirted at College of Charleston. So not as great as it. But I mean, it was like when Brett Gardner was there too. So like, who played for the Yankees, but he ended up moving on to and getting recruited for a full ride to Newberry College, which is up here closer to where we live now in Chapman. So he went to play with his best friend who left me in Charleston for a couple more years. And then after that, we ended up getting married. But so I went to technically two different colleges, but I ended up not finishing at College of Charleston. I decided I didn't want to do education. Once I got the first PE classroom I walked in, I was like, yeah, this is not going to work. If my parents ever want grandchildren, like I need to find another option. But I had already had an interest in business. So that was where I shifted my focus for technical college. So we went ahead and got married, and then I started back to school.
So when you're going through school, having a little bit of ADD, ADHD, did you have certain things in place where you were hit the ground running as far as like being able to keep yourself on track, or what was that progression like?
So I actually didn't start on any type of medication until I was in college. And so my first experience with medicine was not the legal kind, but somebody gave it to me who I trusted, which was a terrible idea. I should never have done that. But they gave me a super small dose of, I believe it was Adderall.
Okay.
And gosh, you might not need to put this on the podcast, but a super small dose. I want to say it's like 10 milligrams. And I was like, I think you get this is obviously a placebo. This is not working. So they gave me a little bit more, and I could probably still recite you. It was right before art history exam, which is why I accepted in the first place, because that was the dullest subject you could select for someone who had ADD to study for. Yeah. So I was going to bomb this exam, and I did not, in fact, bomb the exam. I was like, is this what normal people are like? Is like this what life is like for normal people? I had needed it. So I actually found a doctor and went to a doctor and got diagnosed. They gave me a form to fill out while I was there doing the consultation. And they were talking to me while I was doing that form. And I mean, I had not made it through even like a quarter of the form. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I haven't finished the form. They were like, that was the test. Like, yeah, you're probably ADD. I think we can get you referred to a doctor for some medication. I was like, thanks.
I had to go take one of those tests, and I think I was in like 4th or 5th grade, and I had to sit at a computer with headphones on, and it would like beep, and I had to hit a button. I'm like, this is wild that we have this going on right now. It's like, this is absurd. And I'm pretty sure most people that I talk to, whenever they're given drugs, it's from a person they trust. So it always starts with, oh yeah, my one buddy, I trusted him. He thought it was going to be a good idea. It turned out it worked out. It worked out for us.
It did. It did. And that was the only one I ever tried. So that worked out too. Thankfully, it wasn't a slippery slope from there. But probably could have done that a little bit differently.
Okay, 1 for 1. Hey, we made it. We made it. So did you have problems with early classes, late classes? How did you set yourself up for success through school, or did it just get easier for you?
I actually, I tweaked my medication dosage, and not in the way that would sound really bad, but I would break it up into smaller doses, and I would take those gradually throughout the day, because I actually worked full time during college, especially at College of Charleston. I was a server at a local, it was like a sports bar wings place there, and I would go to early morning classes, finish before like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Sometimes I would like go midday for a run in between if I had like a later class, and then I would get ready and go to work. So I would drive across town to the restaurant, and I would serve until like midnight or later. And then I would get up the next day and do it all over again. So that wasn't really out of necessity. I just wanted my parents, I'd seen how hard they'd worked all their lives. So I wanted to take some of that burden off of them so that they didn't have the added pressure of, a kid in college.
Right. So you really didn't have time to procrastinate like most of the college kids these days.
No, and I do work very well under pressure, as most people who are ADD do.
Yes. Absolutely. So you go through school, your husband, boyfriend's away. How did the long distance thing work for you?
That was a little bit challenging, but he would come see me like sometimes during the week when they didn't have a practice day. He would just usually once a week drive down, and it was probably 2 hours, maybe a little bit more with traffic from Newberry to College of Charleston. So he'd drive one time during the week, and then at least usually every other weekend I would drive to him. So I would take every other weekend off of work, which is partially why I worked so much during the week too.
Yeah.
But I would go visit him and like spend the weekend with him and see his baseball games and things like that, and then drive back.
He seems like someone at a very young age, if I'm not knowing him at all, but he had strong confidence in himself and was a solid rock and really didn't get pushed around with ideas. He just knew what he was going to do and was a nice guy.
Yes, very much so. He was very I don't know, he's just very level-headed. As a college student and even high school student, he pretty sure he started saving up for a ring for me in like high school. So he clearly had more confidence in us than I did. I know, because I wasn't naive to that at all. When we went to when he was leaving for college, I was like, look, easy out. Like, I get it. This is probably not realistic long term. And he's like, what are you talking about? so like, okay, you think it's going to work. And I mean, we had this huge fight about it, but somehow, some miracle, we didn't kill each other and we are still together.
Yeah, that is fantastic. So what was you said you got engaged and then went back to school, or what was the order of operations there?
Yes. So I was in school, got engaged, and then I moved out of my parents' house. So I worked for a semester, and stopped going to school. I was planning the wedding, and then we got married, and then I went back to school. But I was also working full time again.
Gotcha. So with all that going on, how did you eat in high school? I didn't hear that in the schedule. Or sorry, not high school, college. It seems like you were pretty busy.
Working in a restaurant helped. So I'd usually go early, like get some food, or I would take a break. I had a house kind of in between school and work. So I rented a place there. And so I would stop by, grab some lunch. Sometimes he cooked for me, actually, whenever we were there for that 1 year. So he would cook. We lived off of a lot of deer meat. Our family, big, rural area hunting in South Carolina. Both of our families hunted a lot. So we would his dad would send us home with or back to college with deer meat, venison, this deer sausage, I think was our favorite, like the spicy one. So we pretty much lived off of that. I'm pretty sure I probably smelled like game at all times during college.
So were you still doing more or less keto then while you were in college?
Very strict, yes.
That must have just been phenomenal for just like a consistent energy level.
It was. I never felt, I mean, I also started taking medication during that time. So of course I had a little bit extra help, but it really did. It helped me focus and looking, of course, I did not know all of these things. You don't pay attention when you're that young, but I didn't realize how much it did help my focus and my energy levels and just my overall mood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had pizza the other night for our anniversary because the kiddos were sick, so we stayed home, and we both knew that we were just going to be a liability afterwards. It's not going to go well. Like, I'll smile at you from across the bed, but like we're done. We're calling it a night. It's over.
Oh, that's great.
So you're headed back to school. What's it looking like from there?
So I started back to school. I ended up getting offered a management position at, it was that same chain of restaurant. It's just, I moved up to Columbia, South Carolina. So I ended up getting offered a management position there. It started out hourly, and then they had some change in management and they offered me a salary position. But the only piece is that I couldn't continue going to school as well, because you have to go through training, which is like learning every single aspect of the business. It's training is like a 4-week time period. So it would be 60-hour weeks during training, and it just wasn't feasible with school. So I thought about it and I slept on it, and I decided to take the experience over the education. It ended up paying off in the long run. So I learned more on the job and hands-on than I ever did in a classroom.
Mm-hmm. So what was it like being moved up in management for that job?
It was, I was kind of already doing it. So as an hourly manager, I had already like organized the schedules, and I did everyone's schedules. And I did it for like 2 weeks at a time, managed, and these were a bunch of college kids, of course, most of them anyway, especially the front of house, so all the servers. But I would manage all of their college courses. I came up with like surveys for them to complete every time a semester change happened, when their classes were, so I could manage their schedules accordingly. And I had leadership there who let me help hire. They let me help interview candidates coming in and train them too. And then they also just kind of, I don't know, it became a thing. They were like, oh, where's the manager? And they were like, I don't know. They're like, just grab Tiffany. Like, so that became a thing. I learned through observation too, a lot. So I watch people. I can't help it. Like, I like to solve problems. It's probably also a ADHD, I don't know, neurodivergent thing. You can't help but solve problems.
So do you feel like you would have to find the best fit for the employee, or did you just sometimes have bad employees that you were managing?
It was pretty rare that we had bad employees, actually. I don't know. I read between the lines when I'm interviewing someone, and they also had these little psychological tests. I don't know I can't remember what this tool was called that they used for applicants, but they made them go through like a behavioral test.
Really?
Yes. And I would read them for a sports bar. I know I'm sitting here thinking like, what in the world? But I didn't know that it was, it was weird at the time, but they had these behavioral tests that they would put these people through, and I would read those outcomes. And I was like, oh, that's a reasonable decision. If you were going to make this decision, I would look through all of those things and select candidates that way. And it actually ended up being really effective. And so pretty quickly I learned how to interview, and that ended up paying off later on down the road too.
What was the wildest story that you can tell on a podcast at the sport that you had at the sports bar?
That's a good one. There's one I can't tell because it's
I knew there'd be some of those in there.
It's a legal thing. There was a deposition. It was like years later after I'd left the company too. I had to sit there. Oh yes, I know. That one I can't share publicly, but I was pregnant too. Like, it was so much later on that I was like pregnant. I wasn't even with the company anymore. But that was really interesting. I wish I could share that one. But so in restaurants, there's pretty often you see very different characters who have done like hard time, and they have other occupations outside that are not necessarily legal occupations. And so I've never been a part of anything like that. And I also, for some reason, I ended up being like the mom there, and even though I was younger than the majority of them. But I walked in one day, and it's little me fussing at like a 6 foot, 250-pound male that he can't do a drug deal in the walk-in cooler. And he listened, and he never did it again. And so that was just stories like that there was like disorderly the people at the bar. They would just get drunk and they would be rowdy, and I would have to, there's me going up to the same size male who is completely obliterated and telling him he has to leave the bar. But I learned very quickly not to do it like a Nazi. I would do, or an authoritarian, I guess I
Right.
should say. I would do it in a way that was very much coaxing them out of the restaurant in a gentle way. And
Or like
so,
a Jedi master, just we're gonna be heading out here soon.
yeah, like, hey, why don't you walk out here, talk to me, let's see what's going on. Like,
Yeah.
you know, would it be okay if I got a car for you, like a taxi for you, take you home? And then just kind of completely taking their mind off of the fact that I was kicking them out of the bar. And so it's psychological warfare, I guess,
So
at a sports bar.
being around that much drinking and seeing what alcohol does to a lot of people, did that change how your relationship with alcohol? Did you drink much? Did you drink a lot less or?
A lot less.
Okay.
So during those years, I just pretty much didn't at
Okay.
all. It was very rare occasion when I would have like one or two. And even then I didn't mix professional
Right.
with alcohol. So that just, I saw it and it was embarrassing, and I would never want to embarrass myself in that way. And so I didn't partake this. And I mean, people would beg me to like to stay after and hang out because we became one big family.
Yeah.
Very, very odd family, but we looked out for each other. And so it was actually a lot of fun. It sounds pretty awful, but it wasn't at all. I had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah. So what was the next move from there?
So my husband and I had been married for about 2 years at this point, and so I was in management. Had moved into a salary manager position, and it was like the night of our anniversary, and I got a text to come in for like inventory, and I thought that I had put in for 2 days off for our 2-year anniversary, and I was told that like it was denied, but I was never really told that, which was kind of odd for me to have to come in and do inventory on a Sunday night. It's not anybody can do that.
Right.
And so I talked to my manager, and it was that night that I actually reached out to someone who had previously worked for me, who now works for a company. It was a Fortune 500 company.
Okay.
And asked them like what it was like if they were hiring. He gave, stellar reviews. I'd already heard a little bit about the company. And so I applied, and I went ahead and built out the schedule for a month. I accepted the position. I started that January. So our anniversary is November 16th. So that January I started at this new job, and I started in customer service actually on the phones. So it was a very different experience.
So when going back to the job that you're salaried at, if you were managing and you like, what was the person above you doing? Because it seems like you probably handled most everything. What was your manager doing?
He was doing a lot of the budgeting, the numbers, running the numbers, and making sure that we weren't ordering too much or too little. But he managed a lot of those things, and then there was a lot of the heavy lifting. So like changing beer kegs out and things that I couldn't physically do. But also we rotated shifts too. So there always had to be a manager on duty. So we would alternate. But yeah, it was kind of a wild experience.
So we switched to customer service. Do you get a comfy chair and a nice headset? What's the move?
I did. I walked in the first day. I actually met some of my best friends there. And the first day I walk into the elevator, and when we go to get out, the people that were in the elevator with us on my first day tell me to have a nice day. And I was like, did they send out an email blast with it? Like, everyone's so happy. And I was like, oh my God, these people.
Oh no, you're in a cult. What?
I know, like, oh my gosh, oh no. But no, it kind of is like, it's a mindset thing, but like not really.
Yeah.
Everyone genuinely like enjoyed where they worked, and might not always enjoy the actual work they're doing, but they enjoyed where they worked and the people around them, the environment. There was just like, you were expected without ever being told that you were going to dress professionally, you were going to dress nice, you were going to behave yourself in a way that was reputable for the company.
Yeah.
Unspoken things that were just understood. It was weird. It was very, very weird, but it ended up being really, really welcome. But yes, I got the comfy chair. sit stand desk, a headset. I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And then customer service was solving problems. So like a claims issue, why did they process this a certain way? Why is this person's claim not paid out? What's missing? And then relaying that to supervisors when necessary and educating customers. So I loved it. Like that part of it, I really enjoyed. Maybe not necessarily being back to back on phones with people yelling at you, but at least the problem solving aspect of it.
What was your favorite solution that you came up with that someone had like a wild request for?
So I didn't have a ton of like really wild requests, but there was one that was very, very memorable. I had recently become like sort of a backup supervisor.
Okay.
So I'd worked my way up to kind of a supervisor position. And so I would take some of the more escalated calls, but I'd also assist on a line that we had to help the other customer service representatives if they couldn't find their answer. Well, there was this one call in particular, and I actually didn't speak to the person, but it was one of our agents who sold our policies. And his child, the 2-year-old child, was a cancer claim.
Okay.
And this person we were doing what we call a pre-X check, where you go back and you check over the last 2 years, anytime you have a cancer diagnosis, against who? Like, what does this kid have? And so I looked through all of the medical records, and the only thing I saw in there, the ER report, what he went in for, the chief complaint was just bruising, like excessive bruising. And that came back to haunt me later on. But ended up getting it paid out for them. And so it was like $30,000, so that this agent didn't have to call back in repeatedly and fight with the company that he sells the policy for. Like, of all people, can we not pay it out for him?
That's wild.
Yes, it ended up being leukemia. So the child did have a cancer diagnosis, which was awful in itself. So like anything you can do to make that situation just a little bit easier is extremely rewarding. But fast forward, I'll tell you this part a little bit ahead of, kind of out of order. But my 3-year-old, my almost 4-year-old now, a couple of years ago, we had a cancer scare with her where there was, all of a sudden, there was this rash on her leg, and it looked just like a rash. It was kind of like welts in this really weird, like circular pattern. And then all of a sudden she was walking. She loved going up and down the stairs. She'd stopped going up and down the stairs, and she stopped walking. She was crawling again. Yeah. And I looked down at her leg the next day, and it looked like bruising.
Okay.
And so immediately alarm bells go off for me, and I call the doctor, and we go in to see him that day. And it was like a doctor that was on call because it was a last minute visit, obviously. And the nurse, it was during COVID, the nurse's face, whenever she came out to the car to just look at her leg, I was like, she didn't fall, nothing like that. Like, there's no one else, has been around her who would harm her, obviously. Right. I was like, but gave her all the symptoms, and just, you could see it all over her face. And we went in, saw the doctor on call, and it was on his face too. And then he calls our pediatrician, who was at the office that day just with other patients, called him in for a consult. So then I'm in there with like a nurse and 2 doctors.
Not a good ratio.
No, it's never a good sign. It ended up being this random transient thing where we ran blood, like, of course, labs, and those labs came back showing this one particular number was just sky high, like off the charts. It could be a list of a lot of really bad things, and it could be this one thing that is essentially nothing. It's just a growth spurt. You caught them in the middle of like a really extreme growth spurt. Yeah. This list over here is scary as all get out. And so there's nothing good on that list, nothing at all. And so it ended up being that one transient thing that was just nothing. And so that our pediatrician was calling us at like 9:00 at night, giving us updates. Like, once we saw that final result, that repeat lab where it did come down, and it would not come down if it was any of the things on the bad list, just huge relief. It was just a ridiculous growth spurt that she was going through, and happened to And the rash must have just been coincidental. Like the rash happened, the bruising from the rash, and had nothing to do with what she was going through at the time. Like it was just.
So what was going through your head for those hours between the information?
Oh no, it was weeks.
Oh, it was weeks. Oh no.
It was like over a month, and I'm pretty sure I wasn't fully present during those. It was probably a month and a half time frame of waiting and retesting and more tests. Like they checked your liver and all of that, because it can be like would end up resulting in surgery, like a bowel duct obstruction, or it could be bone cancer, or it could be a genetic bone disorder, which doesn't have a really good outcome doesn't have a good life expectancy. Like there was literally nothing good on that list. And so but yeah, I was not all there during that time period.
Well, I'm glad it worked out.
Yes.
That's good. That's good. So from when you guys got married, when did you have your children?
So we were married for about 2.5 years, I believe. So a couple months, maybe 3 months into that new job, we had tried for a little while. And of course, restaurant life wasn't conducive either to having kids. And so that was another motivation for the shift in career. But I think it was 3 months in, I found out I was pregnant with our first child. And I was like, all times, like I didn't think it was going to happen. So we had tried for almost a year, and then it finally took. So we had our first child. It was November of 2016, November 1st.
When you are trying for a year, are you talking with other people? Are you like, how does that look for you? Because my wife has some close friends and on like social media and stuff like that. A lot of people will respond. But the more I talked to her, I was like, hey, like, you guys should all tell your other friends like about this, because it doesn't seem like anybody's talking about a bunch of miscarriages, a bunch of people trying for a long time. And it seems like a lot of people go through it, but everyone seems very alone. And I'm like talking to my mom and other mothers or grandmothers. I was like, nobody knows these things. Like let at least tell your kids. Like it seems wild that it's not out there more.
It is. And that was a time when it's a little bit more out there now, but before then it wasn't. And I had not even told my parents that we were trying, because my mom would have been over the moon excited, and I didn't want to get her hopes up if if for some reason it didn't happen. I was already nervous enough about not being able to have kids.
Yeah.
But I started doing research on my own. That was I've always been a digger. I can't help it. So I'll dig for information for studies. I knew if it didn't happen in the first 6 months, the likelihood of it happening at all in the first year was pretty low, like low percentage chance. I knew all of these numbers about it. And I started doing research about holistic options, because I really didn't want to go the route of, fertility doctors and medications. I knew how harsh those were. So if I could, and I know how expensive it was too. So if I could find alternative options, that would be our best bet. And I actually did find something. It was, I want to say it was chasteberry extract, which now is pretty common for people to use, but it was in the form that's called Vitex. The really weird side effect is it would make your urine like glow in the dark. I don't know what that was about, but a few months, it lengthened my cycle.
It's fine.
I had super short, and probably no side effects, but I had super short cycles, and it actually lengthened it out. It was from like Mediterranean era, or the area where they would have those chasteberry trees. And so it was common knowledge in the olden days for these women to go, and they would get some of the ash. They would burn one of these trees and get the ash from around the trees and put it in like their tea or their food, and then they would get pregnant. Like it was just pretty well known that they would do that. And so I was like, well, can't hurt at this point. Like, we'll just give it a shot. And it sure did. It lengthened my cycles. It was probably the 3rd month in that I was taking it that was when I got pregnant.
So when you say lengthens your cycles, if I can, actually, I'll let you describe it because I was going to give a basic version of my understanding, but we'll just let you do it correctly the first way.
You're
Explain a cycle and then like when you get pregnant and how that works.
So the first day of your cycle is the first day of your period, your menstrual cycle. Most women have 28-day cycles. Mine was 21 days.
Okay.
So I wasn't having enough time in between ovulation, which typically happens in the middle of your cycle. Mine did not. It happened at the very end of each of my cycles.
Okay.
So I had like 5 days, if that, in between my ovulation, whenever you're actually fertile and you can get pregnant, you can conceive, and my menstrual cycle starting all over, my period starting.
Because so you have 5 days, then the egg's gone.
Yep.
Which is wild, the accuracy with some of the like young parents. Like you really just you got a couple days.
Yes. But how these people get pregnant like in high school, I'm like, God, all this time I was worried about that. I had nothing to worry about. But it's crazy how many things have to align perfectly for it to happen, knowing that now as an adult.
So you have those 5, or you only had 5 days, and then what does lengthening look like, and how did you know that it was lengthened?
So it would be a longer period of time in between my first day of my menstrual cycle or my period to the next start of my period.
Okay.
So it extended out the first time from 21 days to 23 days. And then the second month, it went to 26 days. And I was like, okay, so I actually have a chance of like it taking. My cycle is really weird.
Okay.
And typically day 14 of your cycle is when you ovulate. Mine was on like day 18.
And is that through like P tests? Like, how do you know? Okay.
The ovulation test. So I finally bought a pack, and I was gearing it towards what most women's cycles are, where it's in the middle of their cycle. So around day 14, I started taking them, and I had to buy another pack, and then I had another pack. I was like, oh my God, do I just not ovulate? Like, is that the problem? Yeah. But finally, almost at the end of my cycle, it popped positive for ovulation. I was like, well, no wonder. It was 3 days before my next cycle started. So it really didn't have time to take.
Well, so that makes me think like all the like when you're ovulating thing is just like a median. Like it can be this, it can be that, and just like an average amount is here. And that's why we have a second baby, because my wife said, oh, I can't get pregnant today.
Yep, it is a generalization, an assumption based off of the average woman. So,
well, so doing the ovulation test, that's the actual time in which you can get pregnant. And if you're having sex at that time, does it take days to get to the egg, or can it be that day?
I think it could take days. I want to say that sperm can live like for up to, I want to say it's like 24 hours. It's something that's crazy to me. Like I would have never thought. I was like, wait, so then you could ovulate like right after you weren't ovulate, like, and you still get, apparently so. So I learned a lot during that time period. I just can't help but research. So I did every bit of, but I always made the assumption too that that's just all women were like that. Like that's just natural. No.
Well, my wife did the bracelet that does something with like temperature or heat or something like that. But if that algorithm's just based off of like the median woman or whatever it is, then that may not be completely accurate. And I'm going to have some text to send after this just to give some heads up.
Yes. And it's such a small increase in your body temperature, which could come from anything. Like
that could be me sleeping a little bit closer.
Exactly. There's so many things that could trigger that. And that's if the algorithm's perfect.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. All right. We're learning. So as you're going through it, did you change your diet at all? Did you change your husband's diet at all when you were working on getting pregnant?
No, we were both super healthy anyway. Like we would, my husband he didn't eat low carb necessarily. He ate like more of a whole grain. He would he would eat meat, just not as much as I did.
Yeah.
So his and my diet were kind of, it was like the norm at that time for him. And I was completely off the rails, like compared to what most of society was eating like at that time.
I love it. I love it.
I've always been a little bit different.
I did carnivore in 2000, maybe, oh, it might have been 19. But it was because like I was doing health coaching and I was talking about like, oh, we got vegans over here and we got these wild carnivores over here. And I'm like, well, if I'm going to talk crap about it, probably should give it a shot. And I really didn't want to go vegan. So I'm like, all right, I'll get this carnivore thing a shot. And then after like 2 weeks, I was like, oh man, I feel good. this
Yeah.
this is going to be hard to explain to people. Um, but when it comes to nutrition, we have a good picture of that. What did your physical fitness look like before you got pregnant? What were you doing to stay healthy?
So I loved running, and I would also do a lot of like static exercises. So
Nice.
like planking, I loved doing planks and like alternate versions of that. I loved core strength exercises, but running a lot. Even before my wedding, I did a ton of gosh, what was it called? HIIT.
HIIT workouts, high intensity interval training.
Yes, I would like walk uphill slowly for X amount of time, and then I would sprint as far as I could on level. Obviously, I would die if not, but I would sprint, and then I would just alternate back and forth. But I continued running after that too. I would like run before work, and then I'm on my feet all day too. So I was very active during all of that time period. When I got pregnant, I couldn't stand to do it as much. Very early on, like just felt like there was a ton of weight. I know women who run like all through their pregnancy, I don't know how, felt like I was going to drop the baby.
I guess sister-in-law, she was running at like 8 and 9 months. Like, what are you doing, Jess? Like, it just like, we're going for a walk. That's what we're gonna do today.
And I'm winded from a walk.
For your physical training and workouts, were you doing it to be physically in shape? Were you doing it to look a certain way? Like, what was your motivation to work out?
A little bit of both. So I liked having my body in shape to where like I didn't have to worry about my physical fitness. Like I would not get winded by walking on my feet, serving or helping manage the restaurant every day. But I became happy with how I looked, and I just wanted to keep it that way at a certain point. And don't get me wrong, everybody has their own insecurities, but it was as close to perfect for my own personal feelings that I could have gotten.
So after kid number 1, is that when we started our own business, or when did that come around?
No, that actually happened a year ago. So it has not been that long. So the business started, it was August, the first week in August, actually, I signed a contract with my designer to develop the app. I already had the idea for about 3 months before that. And I had another small business, just a women's online clothing boutique that I had started before that with some friends. But outside of that, this was kind of my first big one. But I did obviously a lot of research around nutrition and things like that, but COVID really opened my eyes. That was probably the first like question everything.
That was your moment.
I was looking around and like, so there's been no long-term clinical trials, and I'm not going to be first in line for that. And they're like ramming it down our throats that we're supposed to do this or we're killing what? Like, but if they're vaccinated and it's supposed to protect them, then why are they worried about nothing made logical sense. I was really struggling with that one. And so then I started diving in and I started looking at studies and trends and how this felt like a weird experiment, like social experiment. I was like, what is wrong? You're telling me that like what we're doing is not working, but doctors aren't allowed to try something different. And I mean, I had a friend who passed away from COVID, and like needed a lung transplant because we did the concoction, the whole cocktail with the remdesivir and all of that. The doctors did. And I mean, why can't, and I have my husband's in the medical profession. So it was a very tumultuous time in our marriage. He was from the establishment that, I mean, everything they've been taught in medical school is to trust the science and trust, but there was no science. There was just, we did this really quickly and now you need to trust it, that it's going to be good long-term. And so I struggled with that a while. I was like, I can't be the crazy one. Like, surely I can't be the crazy one. And then it got to a point where it was being mandated. And so I was actually in appeal process with my company at the time. For religious exemption for reasonable accommodation. We had worked from home virtually for 2+ years at that time. And I had been a remote manager. I'd actually hired remotely for the company. And I was like, okay, like it's denied. I was like, okay, what's the appeal process? They didn't even have one. And I was like, okay, so y'all can figure out that appeal process, but I'm not accepting the denial of a religious exemption that I know are well within my rights to request. Not only that, I had an entirely remote team with the exception of one employee. So who do I need to collaborate with that's in office? And that one person was a supervisor who had direct reports. Like, they were responsible. They were okay. None of it made sense.
Well, I think there's a tipping point to where if you do start to question it, then you're like, well, fuck, then I gotta question it all. The angry uncle that's always yelling about the government, like, he may be right about some things. And the unfortunate thing about it is, I was doing construction at the time, but I was still doing the podcast. So like, I talked to like a lot of people, and there's probably like 11 people that I couldn't have on the podcast because if they said what they were going to say, they would be fired. So one of the women that I wanted to have on, she worked for a pharmaceutical company that sold one of the first vaccines. And what she does is she reviews the data from the tests that they did run to see how effective they were, so on and so forth. They send them into the government, which I didn't know that the government doesn't. They just get like an overview. They don't get the studies. And I'm like, what? what do you mean here? So when she did it, she's like, hey, I looked at the stuff, it didn't seem very effective. If you're unhealthy, she knew me, she's like, I'm not a medical professional, but I'm not going to have any of my friends that are healthy because I'm not going to say what sport because that narrows it down the person, but she's like, but who I am right now, like, I'm definitely not healthy, I have comorbidities, I'm absolutely going to take it. So I felt like there just wasn't a very good discourse around the conversation, and that was more or less very disappointing. But then we're just like, all right, if we're going full on this direction, our life's going to be very specific on what we do health wise. So what's the app, and then like what got you started specifically for the company?
So the app is called Freedom Harvest, and it is a direct farm to consumer mobile app with a built-in same-day delivery solution. So it's like Instacart, but it's for same-day delivery from local farms and ranches. And you can see the jump. There's a huge jump from vaccine making me question everything. And I mean, it went into there was a trigger. It was my oldest child. So my oldest child, when she was younger, she would all of a sudden around like age 2.5 up all night, like just would not go to sleep, acted like a complete lunatic. And I finally figured out that it was, I narrowed it down to the popsicles that she was eating. We had sugar-free popsicles, so it wasn't like full of sugar. And I assumed that would probably be okay considering,
Don't tell me these things. We got them in our fridge.
Oh, I know. You're going to go read the ingredients now. It's a really common one, though. You probably already know about this,
Okay.
but it was red 40.
Okay,
And I
okay.
didn't know that at the time. I just put
Yeah.
two and two together that it was the popsicles that were driving it.
Right.
So when we pulled the popsicles out of her diet, all of a sudden, everything changed and she was fine and she was going to sleep normally and she wasn't like, swinging from the ceiling fan. And so I switched that out and I was like, what, then I started asking more questions like, my goodness,
Which, by the way, that is a wild statement that people would be like, why don't you just put her on medicine? And like the fact that you decide to look at what they're eating and possibly something they're eating is changing their attitude is a wild statement that people get very upset about.
Yes, yes. And the fact that it had like a neurological effect to her, like
Right.
she was not herself. She was not her normal self. She was some wild caged animal. Like, but what is in that food that is causing her to act like this? And so eventually I came across an article about red 40 and the food dyes and the impact. And I'm like, oh, wait, they've known about this all along. Well, then why do we allow it in our foods? Oh, Europe doesn't allow it? Well, what?
Yeah.
Like it's banned in Europe? Why? I'm just like, what is this world we live in? And so the more I dug into food, the worse it got. So as a mom, typically you research a little bit about what's good for your kid, what's not, even at a high level. And I was just like, what is in all of our foods? They're chemically designed to be addictive. And then I got on the chronic disease train of like over time, over the last 50 years or so, from early 1900s to 1950s to now, and in children and obesity. And I was just like, what? Oh my gosh. I was like, okay, so like, what's my option? What's my option here? What's my best bet? And so what I found was, when you can't figure out what the answer is because you don't, all of a sudden, you don't know what to believe and everything you've been taught seems to be a lie, or was for profit. Some of it, I think, is just ignorance. Some of it negligence. And then some of it just pure evil and for profit and greed. And so I looked at what worked last. When was chronic disease not like just rampant in our nation? And I went back to like 1950s, 1960s area. Okay, so what did those kids eat growing up? Whole foods. Whole foods as close to their natural state as humanly possible, not whole grains. Whole foods, which is a whole other thing, the greenwashing. But okay, so like fruits, vegetables, meats, saturated fats, natural fats, lard is what they cooked with, butter.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Like I was just like, oh my gosh, everything that we have learned has been untrue. So my best bet was locally grown, locally raised, farmers and ranchers who are growing their food and feeding that same food to their families. They're not going to intentionally poison me, because they're feeding their families the same foods. And they still have to see me at the gas station and at church on Sunday and at the ball field. They are not going to harm me on purpose. What I found is they actually protect their brand more than any corporation ever will.
Yeah.
So, and the genuine way, like not the unethical way. So I was like, well, I'm working full time. I had worked my way up into a director role at that company at that point. And I work a lot and I don't want to spend extra time lugging my kids around to local farms and sourcing that food. I don't have time for that. I'm exhausted at the end of the day. And so I was like, oh, well, surely, I just needed as easy as Instacart. Surely there's an app out there for that. And there wasn't.
Yeah.
And so I came up with like a business plan for it and researched like different ways to build it, what the cost should be involved. And then there was this one night where I just felt this overwhelming urgency that I was starting to put puzzle pieces together of like the WEF, the World Economic Forum, the attack on farmers, the cow farts that apparently are, destroying our world. Oh my gosh, it's all of these things. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like their aim is to control the food supply. So realizing that either control the food, I think there is a small group that's trying to control the food supply, some mild conspiracy theorists, but then I also think some of it's just negligence and ignorance too, where all of the protesting that they intend for good is like animal cruelty. Well, if you go down that path, where does that lead? And that's animal culling, because if those animals don't have value, those animals don't exist.
Right.
And if they don't exist, that's doing a lot more harm to our environment than good. And there's still going to be animal cruelty. And it doesn't make any logical sense. So I think some of it's ignorance and just a lack of education and realizing that farmers and ranchers actually do care about their cattle.
Right. I think they care the most.
Yes. Yes. And the requirements for humane treatment, even into the processing, is people don't know about that. They just assume that like, oh, they're just mean, they don't feed them and they just shoot them in the head. Like, no, there's a whole, they're kept. Yeah. They're well kept during that time period. While they're there, they usually have it pretty quickly, so they don't have to sit out in the hot sun. They have fans, they have water, they're fed. Yeah. And then they actually aren't allowed to miss. They when they process and put a cow down, they aren't allowed to miss over, I think, like 2 or 3 times, or they shut the whole processing plant down.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So it is, which rarely happens anyway, because they don't want that. Right. I mean, that's not the goal, is to just be heartless. Yeah. It is, they actually care. They understand the value that cow is giving to them. So anyway, I had this overwhelming urgency that if I didn't do something, and I knew I was capable, probably, I don't know, delusion, who knows, but I knew that if I didn't do something, that my kids and their generation would see famine in their lifetime. Yeah. And I never wanted them to be controlled by food. I never wanted anyone to tell them how much they can eat of something, or what they can eat, or when they can eat it. Right. And certainly don't want them to have to eat bugs as an alternative. So I called my husband and already had my resignation letter drafted. And I didn't even know how I was going to fund it at the time, actually. I had figured that out after the fact. But I handed in my resignation, pretty sure my whole family thought I had lost my mind.
I mean, I feel like a lot of people have probably had the same thought that something needs to change, but you're actually doing it. So I'm very happy that someone is doing it.
It's crazy to look back that all that has transpired in just like a year's time. That I gave them a month's notice, because it was really hard for my teams. And I still keep in touch with several of them now too. But the people that I had reporting to me at the time, they were family. Like, it was, that was a really hard decision to make, to leave them, because I enjoyed what I did. Right. And sure, like it wasn't easy, putting out fires that are created by other people, but I was good at what I did. I was good at leading them and protecting them as employees, and caring for them in a way that I would want to be cared for as an employee. Yeah. But leaving that behind, my dad was like, sweetheart, like, 6-figure salaries don't grow on trees, right? Like, yeah. You're just gonna quit. It's like, I already did, Dad. It's like, yeah. I already did. And my husband, bless his heart, he supported me through it. I'm pretty sure he thought I had lost my mind too. And now he is like, he has been fully on board. And once he got to see it in the App Store, so it's live in both app stores now, and the Google Play Store and the iOS app stores. But getting to see it, and then like getting to see me order for the first time from a local farm and have it delivered here off of the app that I created, that was really cool. Super proud.
What has growing been like for you? Has it been faster, slower, what you thought it was going to be?
It has been about what I thought it was going to be. Okay. I really thought that one thing I underestimated is how much the farmers and ranchers have been sold, like oversold and marketed to recently with direct to consumer. Gotcha. There are no other ones out there that have a same day delivery solution built into it that solves for that for them. Yeah. But there are plenty of them out there who they're like their websites. I think Barn to Door has an app, but there's no delivery solution built in other than shipping, which really only works for meat. And even then it's really hard. Right. But I just thought that, the farmers and ranchers would hear it, and it would I'd have no problems like convincing them. And
Yeah.
typically when I talk to them, that's the case. Like I'd rarely have someone say like, no, thanks. But whenever it's more getting them on the phone,
Right.
it's really hard. And getting in front of them in a way that they will actually see it and watch it and hear it. And so I started doing farmer and rancher interviews.
Okay.
I did the first one because I loved hearing this man talk. So rancher out of Newberry, his name is Mr. Sheely, Walter Sheely.
That's
He
a
owns,
phenomenal name.
oh, right. And he bought his first heifer at like age 13. And it was a 4-H project.
Okay.
He then grew his herd. His dad was a pastor locally in Newberry and a business owner before that. And it's a really awesome story. So I encourage you to go listen to
Absolutely.
it. It's on TikTok and Instagram. It's the history of Black Grove. But I loved hearing him talk. He ended up going into financial services in financial investment consulting. And he worked I think he ended up being like a VP of a bank in Miami and moved all around Miami, Chicago, all of the larger metro areas, and ran banks in those areas. But he has a really unique experience. And I want to say he's in his 70s now.
Yeah.
But I could listen to him talk all day long. He has like that old Charleston accent. And it's really cool to hear him tell stories.
He's not in a rush. He's not in a rush to get anywhere, but he's gonna keep you on the edge of your seat.
Yes. His stories. There's so much wisdom there and knowledge and experience. And so it's really cool to listen to. So I started interviewing him, and they keep going viral. And I think there's a couple right now that are continuing to go viral on Instagram and TikTok.
That's awesome.
Yes. It's been really interesting. So I interviewed my dad too at one point. And that was the first time I got to hear from his perspective of like me quitting my career. And it was hilarious. Yes. And so you can probably see that one on there. I want to say it's like Freedom and the beginning of Freedom Harvest or something like that is the title. But he tells just a little bit about that, that experience, like you're doing one. So he's worked his way up in that company. And so he and I have very similar personalities where we don't let much deter us. If we've decided we're doing something, we're just going to figure it out.
That's awesome. So right now we have, I think, half a cow in our freezer. That's because we have a friend that has a friend that they're on a farm, but we're looking to just, it's all like, hey, somebody, this and that. So for your app, you pretty much just log in, or you go look at what you're looking for, or like what specifically is it for?
So each farm has their own, or ranch has their own individual profile.
Okay.
And homesteads are welcome to. They run just off of subscription. So they pay one flat fee. It's super inexpensive, especially in comparison to the other softwares.
I bet.
But they have their profile. They control their products that they sell on there. We're actually integrating with Square Inventory now for management across websites and our app. So you don't have to manually update inventory if someone purchases something. But they can control their description. They also control the timing of the dispatch of delivery too. So if they want to do a quarter cow, I think a whole cow would be a little challenging. That's a bit much for one delivery. But the quarter cow usually, and then there's a lot of people do the 20-pound or 25-pound boxes of beef. So they can do those if they'd like to. But they just add their products on there. We don't take a portion of their revenue. We split up my business model is similar to Instacart's, where they have a service fee per transaction for consumer side. Yeah. And then they also have I think they actually do charge revenue. So a percentage of the sales off of the platform.
Is the price on their website through you the same as the price that they would get if they walked in? Yes. That's wonderful. We've been buying bread for $8.50, and then we go into the store and it's $7.50. I'm like, what? What's going on here?
I know. That was actually something that one of the farmers asked me. They're like, do we have to increase our overall fees or our product prices in order to account for the subscription? Do you take a cut? And I was like, we don't take a cut of that. from day one, I knew I needed to keep it affordable for farmers and ranchers. I didn't want to take a percentage of their profits. They already have some profit margins.
Yeah.
If they're existent at all. Most of them are at a loss right now. But if I could do that in a way that's affordable, keep that very simple, very basic, shop around, get the best developers. And that part kind of fell in my lap. I didn't have to end up doing that. I found that designer already had a developer team who worked with them, and they were phenomenal.
Yeah.
And probably the last job they'll do for that price, actually. So the timing of it couldn't have been better. But I still have like a long lasting working relationship with them because they're just that wonderful. But they built the app in a way that kept everything very simple. I knew my target audience. I knew my clientele as well. It needed to be basic, simple, nothing crazy fancy. Just products, a payment processor on the back end.
Yeah.
And we built it knowing we would integrate with a courier company. So we didn't create a fleet ourselves. We tapped into DoorDash Drive and have a 25-mile delivery radius. So it's a little bit further than what normal DoorDash is.
Yeah.
But the farmers and ranchers control the timing of dispatch of delivery. So it's not until they mark that as ready, up to 48 hours for them. So the orders will stay in the system for up to 48 hours before they need to mark it as ready or available. And then the courier, that triggers the dispatch for the courier to come pick it up, take it to the consumer.
So I think there's people that we should pay more. And I think farmers, teachers, actually our police officers over here get paid a bunch. So I'm okay with where their prices are. Yes. We live in a good area. But why is it that farmers seem to be having such a hard time, but grocery stores seem that their prices seem to be exponentially higher? Why is the farmer not doing so well?
Well, there's multiple answers to that. So one is regulation. There's a lot of really costly regulation around farms and ranches, especially selling retail direct to consumer. Lots of loopholes. There's processing costs have gone up. Labor costs have gone up. There's also been like an attack on farmers and ranchers in some states where they are being pushed out by development. So they're already struggling.
So what does that mean, an attack? Like someone's trying to buy them up, or what does an attack mean?
So an attack on basically just their way of life. So you see it a lot in the media as like the cows are destroying the environments, or farmers, the animal cruelty piece of it too, or the monocropping, like monocrop, so row crops, corn. Yes. When corn actually keeps our gas prices a little bit lower because it's ethanol, so where we get ethanol from. And then cow byproducts, if you get rid of those, actually cow byproducts are where we get insulin from. And so I think a lot of people just need an education around agriculture and where all these things come from. Like they don't just show up on the store shelves. They don't grow on grocery store shelves. They come from somewhere. And so also imports. So we're importing meat and vegetables and fruits, which some of it's seasonal. Of course, imports as a whole isn't a bad thing, but we're importing items that have been produced at, I don't want to say a lower quality because that's not always the case, but their level of regulation and animal care and husbandry is not necessarily the same level as what we are required to do in the U.S. As a producer. And not only that, inflation might not be as bad over there, whereas you flood the market with a bunch of those cheaper imports. And and so now those farmers and ranchers can't compete with those prices. Inflation, operating costs, all of it plays into it. So they've just kind of been, it's like a multi-pronged attack on the farmers and ranchers, driving them out of business. And then housing development. So land has become a commodity. It's always been a commodity, but it's such a valuable one now, where we're getting floods of people coming in to and moving different states. So we've seen a flood of people to Texas, to Florida, and it is pushing farms and ranches further and further out. So their profit margins are slim. Those developers are coming in and buying up that land and offering them a very generous sum of money, driving cost of housing up in those areas
Yeah.
and driving the farmer out. They're like, I'm going to lose it if I don't do something. And that's their only option. A lot of them don't have options.
Yeah.
So it is, yeah, it's a
So,
big storm.
so for farmers to make more, can with your app, are they seeing a lot more volume then?
Yeah, so we're still gathering data,
Okay.
but we're proving out a study that I found where, and it's actually a more recent one too, on-demand apps see a 300% higher conversion rate than websites.
Okay.
And that's an on-demand app.
Yeah.
Mobile apps in general see about 157% increase in conversion rate without the on-demand piece to it.
Yeah.
So our goal is to see significant growth. We're targeting Austin, Texas right now for farmer acquisition. And then we push ads in those areas for users to download.
Yeah.
And then we also have push notifications being an app. Nice. That's a big key that drives that conversion rate up too. Push notifications.
Target those CrossFit gyms. Those people will pay extra for whatever you tell them.
Yes.
Being one of those people.
Oh yes, that has been the carnivore conferences and things like that have been pretty awesome. But I think there's a huge movement like that in Austin right now too. And then the demographic, it's just perfect for what we're looking for. Plus they have tons of farms and ranches that are still just right there on the outskirts of Austin that haven't been fully pushed out yet.
So is there, now this is a little bit more away from the application, but would it even be capable for most cities to be fed by local farms, or there's just not even close to the amount of food necessary to make that happen?
In current state, there's not enough food. That's just a reality. We've seen such a huge loss of them. I want to say it's like in the last 10 years, we've lost somewhere around like 300,000, maybe more. I could have that number wrong, but we've lost a significant amount of family-owned farms and ranches. But this allows incentive for more people to go into agriculture and to start those farms. It's essentially a guaranteed marketplace for them to use and leverage. And it's like, it starts at like $15 a month, and you can let it grow. Like, it only grows that subscription price if you are growing significantly. And so I tied my success to
they're only paying 15 to start. That's phenomenal.
Yes.
That's wild.
Right now, I mean, I can earn off of both sides because you have the service charge, so per transaction for the consumer, and eventually I'm sure we'll do some type of subscription option for the consumer as well to avoid that charge per transaction. But for now, it's the easiest way for us to organize it. But so per order, I would also have revenue coming into the company. Yeah. So even if we keep that low over time, my goal is for us to get volume. I don't need to have the biggest players in the game. I just need a lot of them.
Yes. Well, it's just, there's so many people that you talk to that, especially our age, like 30s to 40s, not really only knowing going to a grocery store. And I mean, that's what I grew up in. I didn't know I thought you go to a farm like to see animals. I didn't know there was anything else that happened at farms. I'm like, what is this? There's corn in Illinois and there's farm animals. I don't know what those farm animals do, but that's great that there's corn. As far as, we're close to the end here, but as far as subsidies go, I know there's a lot of subsidies for corn and monocropping and stuff like that. Why is there not subsidies for like the farming, the meat and the stuff like that?
Well, you could really say that it's a corporate thing. So those subsidies typically, they don't go out to the smaller players. The small family-owned farms. And when I say small family-owned farms, it's 500,000 in revenue per year or less is what they consider. Yeah. Oh. Crazy, right? So that's who I cater to, is the smaller producers. And some of them have been considered, I heard this term recently, it's like a micro producer. So Mr. Shealy out in Newberry, he would be considered a micro producer. And it's crazy. They don't get the subsidies. They don't. Yeah. I mean, sure, there's some of it that's a tax write-off to a certain point when you're talking about input costs, but most of them Most of them do not get subsidies. Those are not doled out on a silver platter like a lot of people assume they are. Those are going to those huge corporate factory farms that are owned by a conglomerate of companies, and their goal is not necessarily the best nutrition or their consumers' health and well-being. It's a bottom line. Right. Whereas these farmers and ranchers will gladly sacrifice an order if you have a bad experience with them to replace that. They will eat that every single day. It's a no-brainer when it comes to who you want to trust with your health.
Well, I was going to ask you, like, if you could have a wand and wish something would happen, but you're doing it. Like, it's not like I hope this could happen. Like, you're actually doing it. So to end things, I'll ask the same two questions that I ask everybody. What's your definition of health? Not necessarily the dictionary definition, but what is health to you?
Health to me is longevity, the ability to function in a way that our ancestors did, for us to be able to go out and hunt and spend time with family and cook real food, not a science experiment in a lab, for us to truly eat the way our ancestors did, the way God intended us to. I'm a religious person, so and I know some people don't believe, but for me, it's very much evident in the Bible to how you should live your life and how you should eat. Mm-hmm. Even if you don't believe in a higher power or you don't believe in God, if you read those words, you know exactly what they are trying to explain, that it's how you can live a good life without being just a greedy, hateful person or sick person. It just seems like it's a guidebook for life. Right. You kind of can't fail when you go that route, but whole foods as close to their natural state as humanly possible, no chronic disease.
Yep.
I mean, that's the goal. That's the dream. That's what I hope to see here in the coming years.
Absolutely. And then what's something from your life that you think people listening to the podcast would take away as a positive?
You don't have to know everything before you start. If I did, I would have never started. You learn so much when you just dive headfirst into something and force yourself to learn how to do it. When you don't give yourself another choice, you'll figure it out.
Yeah. I love that. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's been so much fun.